Imagine for a second that your refrigerator is completely empty. Like you need groceries to feed your family right now.
Right, totally bare.
Yeah. But the nearest supermarket isn't just down the street. It's, 3 towns over.
Oh, wow.
You're looking at a 2-hour drive round trip. And on top of that, you don't have a reliable car. Gas is super expensive. And you can't really leave your kids home alone.
So it's basically a logistical nightmare.
Exactly. I mean, it's not that you don't want to eat. And it might not even be that you don't have the money for the actual food itself.
Right, the food isn't the issue.
No, it's that the sheer physical logistics of getting to the store and back make it nearly impossible to pull off, without completely upending your entire day.
Right, it's just a massive wall.
Now, I want you to imagine that instead of groceries, you are desperately trying to find a professional therapist to help you deal with, say, severe depression or acute anxiety.
Which is obviously a lot more urgent than just running out of milk.
Oh, absolutely. So we're looking at a briefing today from a group called Coping and Healing Counseling, or CHC. They operate a telehealth therapy practice.
Yeah, and it's a really eye-opening document.
It really is. The source material here zeroes in on rural Georgia, and it outlines how telehealth is being used to bypass some incredibly rigid geographical and cultural barriers. Okay, let's unpack this because we often talk about healthcare access purely as a matter of having health insurance.
Right, the whole "are you covered" debate.
Exactly. But this document argues that geography itself is often the primary antagonist here.
What's fascinating here is how the source material immediately recognizes that exact friction. Like it speaks directly to the people living inside that reality.
Yeah, it doesn't bury the lead.
Not at all. Right off the bat, the text addresses a very specific reader. It says, to the person reading this from rural Georgia who thought therapy wasn't really for people like us, it is.
That's a really powerful opening.
It is, because it doesn't start with medical jargon or clinical terms. It starts by acknowledging a deeply ingrained, preconceived notion about who actually gets to access therapy.
And what that access even looks like on a practical level.
Exactly. It acknowledges that the traditional clinical model, where a patient has to take a half day off work, drive miles down the highway, sit in some unfamiliar waiting room, it just does not function in these rural environments.
It's just broken for them.
Right. So the model flips. Instead of demanding the patient climb a mountain to get to the clinic fundamentally changes its shape to come directly to the patient.
The burden of access entirely shifts. But, before we get into how they do that, I really want to spend some time on why that burden is so heavy to begin with.
Yeah, we have to look at the landscape.
Right. The text lays out the stark physical realities of this state. It points out that in many Georgia counties, there are 0 licensed therapists. None.
0? That's just wild to think about.
It is. If you need a behavioral health provider or like a specialized psychiatrist, you are easily looking at a 2-hour round trip just to sit in a room with someone.
And that's if you can even get an appointment.
Exactly. And this is where I think the traditional narrative around healthcare gets it completely wrong.
How so?
Well, we always hear that the premium or the deductible is the big wall keeping people out, right?
Right. The out-of-pocket costs.
But this text highlights hidden structural costs that insurance companies simply do not reimburse. Like, they explicitly list gas money.
Which adds up fast.
Oh, for sure. And they list the cost of paying a babysitter for the 3 hours you're away from the house.
Because you can't just leave the kids.
Right. And then they list the lost wages from clocking out of your shift early just to make the drive before the clinic closes at 5 p.m.
Which is exactly why your grocery store analogy is so apt.
It's the same problem.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you start to see the mechanics of what is essentially a mental health desert. It's a compounded logistical failure.
Right. It's not just one hurdle, it's 5.
Exactly. Let's look at the math for a typical hourly wage worker. You have a 50-minute therapy session. But to get there, you need to drive an hour each way.
So that's almost 3 hours total.
Right, 3 hours out of the middle of a Tuesday. If you work at a manufacturing plant, or you run a local farm, or you're a single parent, managing school pickups, carving out 3 hours, is a structural impossibility.
You literally just can't do it.
No. You don't just need the internal courage to say, I need help. You need a reliable vehicle that won't break down on the highway.
Yeah.
You need disposable income for a tank of gas. You need a manager who will actually approve the time off without penalizing you. And you need alternative childcare.
It's like someone offering you a completely free, beautiful, grand piano, but you live on the fifth floor of a walk-up apartment building with no elevator.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
The item itself might be fully covered, but the grueling logistics of getting it into your living room makes the offer basically useless.
Right, you can't actually use it.
If your insurance pays 100% of the clinical visit, but you lose $100 in wages and gas just to get there, the care isn't actually accessible.
Precisely. And when you stack all of those logistical requirements up, you realize that telehealth in these specific zip codes is no longer just a convenient alternative or, some modern tech luxury.
It's not just FaceTime for fun.
No, it becomes the absolute only viable lifeline. The map itself is the obstacle, and the only way to beat the map is to bypass it entirely, using a cellular network. It just removes the necessity of physical infrastructure.
But let's play devil's advocate for a second.
Okay, let's hear it.
Let's imagine someone actually beats the map. They get the afternoon off, they pay for the gas, they make the long drive, or maybe they're fortunate enough to live in one of the rural counties that actually does have a small mental health clinic right on Main Street.
Sure, let's say the physical geography is solved.
Right. Here's where it gets really interesting. The source points out that even if you conquer the physical logistics, there is a massive psychological and social wall waiting for you in the parking lot.
Oh, the social aspect is huge.
It is. The text brings up the concept of the small-town fishbowl. You know how it is in a small community? Everyone knows your vehicle.
Oh, yeah, they know your truck, your license plate.
Exactly. Everyone knows whose truck is parked outside the diner or the hardware store or the local clinic.
It's a profound loss of anonymity. I mean, think about it.
Yeah.
In a dense city, you can walk into a high-rise building that houses 50 different businesses, and nobody on the sidewalk knows if you were going to the dentist, an accountant, or a therapist.
You're just a person walking into a lobby.
Right. But in a rural setting, walking through the front door of a standalone behavioral health clinic is highly visible.
You're on display.
For a lot of people, taking that walk feels like broadcasting your most private, internal struggles to everyone you know. You are completely exposed to the judgment of your neighbors before you even speak to a doctor.
And the briefing doesn't shy away from explaining the why behind that fear of judgment either. It's not just a vague sense of being embarrassed.
No, it's deeply cultural.
The clinicians at CHC point to specific, deeply rooted cultural contexts. Like, they explicitly mention the "we handle our own" ethos. I find that fascinating.
It's incredibly common in those areas.
That is an incredibly powerful cultural force. If you grow up in an environment with tight-knit family expectations and strong faith communities, there is often an unwritten rule that problems stay inside the house.
Yes, the expectation is generational. It's the idea that relying on anything outside of your family unit or your church leadership is basically an admission of failure.
Like you're weak or something.
Exactly. And look, those tight-knit communities provide immense, beautiful support systems.
Oh, for sure. They rally around each other.
They do. But they can also function as a pressure cooker. If you are struggling with severe clinical depression, and the cultural expectation is that your faith or your family should be sufficient to fix it, then making an appointment with an outside clinical professional feels like a betrayal of your community's values.
You're airing dirty laundry.
Exactly.
You aren't just fighting your own anxiety, you're fighting your grandfather's expectations. Which is why the makeup of the CHC team seems so deliberate to me.
Yeah, their staffing is very intentional.
The source notes they have a team of over 15 licensed clinicians, but the crucial detail is that many of these therapists actually grew up in small Georgia towns themselves.
That changes the dynamic completely.
It does. We hear the phrase cultural competence thrown around a lot in corporate settings, but here it seems to have a very practical, on-the-ground application.
It does, because cultural competence here means they aren't outsiders looking in with, clinical detachment, trying to force a city-centric mindset onto a rural patient.
Right. They aren't trying to change the patient's whole worldview.
They possess a lived understanding of those religious and family pressures because they share that background. When a patient hesitates because they feel guilty about stepping outside their church for help, a clinician from that same background knows exactly how heavy that we handle our own expectation is.
They don't just brush it off.
No, they don't judge the hesitation. They validate it. They know exactly what the small-town fishbowl feels like, which allows them to build trust much faster.
So if you think about it, the geography makes it nearly impossible to get there, and the culture tells you not to go, even if you could. You have these two massive compounding walls.
It's a miracle anyone gets help under those conditions.
Honestly, yeah. Let's look at how the CHC service physically bypasses both of these walls. Enter the 100% telehealth iPay compliant model outlined in the briefing.
Which is key here, the high-pay compliance.
Yeah, and for anyone who isn't familiar, iPay compliance basically means federal privacy laws protect your medical data, so the video platform they use is fully encrypted and secure. Nobody is intercepting your call.
It's completely private.
The promise is a licensed therapist on your screen, in your space, on your schedule. No driving, no waiting rooms.
And the text gives highly specific examples of what this looks like in practice. We aren't talking about a patient sitting in a pristine, perfectly lit home office with a plant in the background.
Right, it's much more gritty than that.
The briefing mentions taking a session from the cab of a pickup truck during a lunch break.
Wow.
It mentions doing therapy from a dark bedroom after the kids are finally asleep, or just pulling into a secluded parking lot somewhere.
That's incredible.
It wraps up the thought with an incredibly potent line. It says, "Nobody in town has to know you're getting help unless you tell them."
So what does this all mean? We are talking about transforming a hot pickup truck or a quiet parking lot into a therapist's office.
Basically.
And I have to push back a little on this idea because we are conditioned to think of therapy as taking place in a very controlled, quiet clinical setting with like white noise machines and leather couches for a reason.
Right, the traditional aesthetic.
It's designed to be a safe container. Does sitting in a parked car on your lunch break really offer the same level of care? Like, does that fundamental shift in environment change the dynamic of the therapy itself?
This raises an important question, and the answer is yes. It absolutely changes the dynamic. But from a psychological standpoint, it changes it for the better in these specific contexts.
Really? How so?
It all comes down to the locus of control. When you walk into a traditional clinical space, the therapist controls the environment.
They own the room.
They control the lighting, the seating arrangement, the temperature. The patient has to navigate a waiting room, fill out clipboards with a receptionist, and step into an institution.
Right. It can be very intimidating.
Exactly. For someone already struggling with anxiety or someone who fears being seen, that institutional setting can actually heighten their defensive barriers.
That makes total sense. They are playing an away game.
Precisely.
Yeah.
But a truck cab, that is the patient's domain. It is their familiar territory. They control the temperature, they control the radio, they lock the doors.
They feel safe before the session even starts.
By meeting the patient in that space, the therapist is essentially being invited into the patient's real life. It integrates behavioral health into the messy reality of their daily routine, rather than forcing the patient to artificially step out of their life to go sit in a sterile room somewhere.
Wow, that's a huge perspective shift.
It takes a brief 30-minute window of solitude in a parked car and turns it into a genuinely safe, highly private space for healing. The privacy isn't just about data encryption. It's about the patient controlling who sees them.
It democratizes the space where healing happens. Like, if the truck is where you feel safe, then the truck is the clinic.
Perfectly said.
Now, having established the physical and psychological barriers and where this therapy is actually taking place, let's transition to the hard facts and the source about who is actually on the other side of that screen.
The clinical team.
Right, and how the patient is paying for it. Because all of this sounds innovative, but if it costs $300 an hour out of pocket, we are right back to square one.
The financial wall would just replace the geographic wall.
Exactly. So let's look at the mechanics. The text states, CHC serves all 159 Georgia counties. They have this team of 15-plus licensed therapists.
Which is a solid roster.
It is. The briefing uses a bit of an alphabet soup here, though. LCSWs, LPCs, LMFTs. Let's translate that really quickly for everyone listening.
Sure. So LCSWs are licensed clinical social workers. They're highly trained in psychotherapy, but they also have a deep understanding of how social systems like poverty, housing, or workplace stress impact mental health.
Oh, okay. So a very holistic view.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Then you have LPCs, which are licensed professional counselors, focusing heavily on individual mental health and cognitive behavioral therapies. And LMFTs are licensed marriage and family therapists.
Which feels incredibly relevant given our earlier conversation about tight-knit family expectations and generational pressure.
Exactly. And the reason having that diverse mix of credentials matters is because a town with 0 therapists doesn't just lack a general sounding board. It lacks access to highly specialized care.
Right. You need experts for specific issues.
The text lists their treatment specialties: anxiety, depression, trauma, and PTSD, grief, relationships, and severe stress.
That covers a lot of ground.
It does. If a teenager in a remote county experiences a severe trauma, they don't just need someone to talk to. They need a specialist trained in trauma protocols. CHC is pulling that specialized expertise out of the major cities and beaming it directly into the rural counties.
Wow.
They offer individual, couples, family, and teen therapy for anyone ages 13 and up, along with life coaching.
But let's hit on the money. Because, if you are a family living paycheck to paycheck and you have to choose between a $100 therapy copay and paying the electric bill is going to win every single time.
Mental health care gets treated as a luxury expense.
Unfortunately, yes. The insurance details provided in the briefing are arguably the linchpin of this entire operation.
The numbers are pretty impressive.
Here is the breakdown from the text. For Medicaid patients, there is a $0 copay. Zero.
That's huge.
And for major commercial insurances, the text specifically lists Aetna, Cigna, Blue Cross Blue Shield, United Healthcare, and Humana. The cost ends up being just $10 to $40 per session.
We really need to look at the mechanism of what a $0 copay actually does psychologically.
What do you mean?
It doesn't just save money. It removes the guilt associated with seeking help.
Oh, wow. I hadn't thought about that.
For a parent who is used to sacrificing everything for their kids, spending $100 on their own therapy feels selfish.
Right. They'd rather buy groceries.
By combining the logistical freedom of a telehealth app with a $0 Medicaid rate or a $20 commercial copay, you eliminate the guilt. You bring the cost of professional specialized mental health care down to the price of a couple of fast food meals, or literally nothing at all.
It completely shatters that final financial wall.
Yeah.
So if we look at the whole picture, the geography was the first wall, and they beat it with a scream. The cultural stigma of the small-town fishbowl was the second wall, and they beat it by moving the clinic into the privacy of a locked truck cab.
Exactly.
And the exorbitant out-of-pocket cost was the third wall, and they beat it by fully integrating Medicaid and commercial insurance. It is a model designed to dismantle all three barriers simultaneously.
It creates a comprehensive statewide safety net that completely ignores county lines. In this model, geographic borders no longer dictate health outcomes.
That's a huge deal for rural areas.
A teenager struggling with severe anxiety in the most remote, underserved county in the state now has the exact same access to an LMFT as someone living in a high-rise in downtown Atlanta. The lack of local infrastructure is bypassed entirely.
Which brings us to the core philosophy we've been circling today. The reality outlined in the CHC briefing shows us a fundamental paradigm shift.
It really is a shift.
Therapy in rural environments facing these kinds of deficits is no longer about leaving your community to go find help. It is about getting the help while staying right where you are. You stay in your community, you stay near your family, you maintain your daily work routine, and you find those hidden 30-minute pockets of time to do the work.
It is a profound shift from a centralized healthcare system where all the resources are hoarded in a single building to a radically decentralized one.
Bringing the care to the people.
But it relies entirely on the individual realizing that the old rules no longer apply and granting themselves permission to access it.
And the source material provides the immediate next steps for anyone ready to grant themselves that permission today.
They make it very easy.
The contact details provided are very clear. You can reach Coping and Healing Counseling by phone at 404-832-0102. You can visit them online to see the therapists at chctherapy.com, or you can email them directly at support@chictherapy.com.
It's all right there.
I want to read the exact line they used to close out their briefing because it really captures the empathetic tone we've been talking about. They write, "Tonight is a good night to take that step."
It's an invitation that requires no travel, no sitting in a public waiting room, and absolutely no public explanation to your neighbors. Just a quiet moment, an internet connection, and a screen.
And that leaves us with something fascinating to think about long after we wrap up today.
Oh, I'm curious.
We've just explored how telehealth can transform a local parking lot or the front seat of a pickup truck into a deeply private space for healing, completely bypassing decades of geographic and cultural barriers.
Wow.
It makes you wonder, what other traditionally formal clinical services might soon be decoupled from brick-and-mortar buildings? What else could seamlessly integrate into the quiet, hidden moments of our everyday lives? Something to think about.